for joining World Law Group's The S in ESG webinar. I am Hannah Shea, World Law Group's Manager of Communications and Network Development. I just want to go over a few housekeeping items before we start the webinar. You have been muted upon arrival, so please remain muted throughout the duration of the presentation until we open up Q&A at the end. During Q&A, you can either use the raise hand feature or you can simply drop your question into the chat and we will try to address them all. If we are not able to, we will do so via email after the webinar. The webinar will be recorded and you'll be able to find it on our website, and we will also share it with everyone who has joined us today. I am now going to hand this over to our the EMEA co-chair of the compliance group, Rebecca Cross of Taylor Wessing in Germany.
Hello, good morning, good evening, good afternoon. My name is Rebecca Krause. I'm a corporate and compliance lawyer at Taylor Wessing in Germany. As Hannah said, I'm the EMEA chair of the compliance and investigation group. The group was launched last year, and since then there were held a numbers of webinars and meetings. In addition, we published an anti-bribery guide, including the anti-bribery rules for various countries. I'm very happy to present today this webinar with very interesting speakers and moderators. This webinar is part of our ESG series, so there's one webinar for each letter. With respect to the E for environmental, you can find the recording on the World Law Group website. The webinar for G we will hold in December. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Katja Schiffelholz and Clara Serva, who will moderate this panel.
Yeah, thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Hannah. Hello, my name is Katja Schiffelholz, as introduced by Rebecca, and I will be your co-moderator for today's webinar. I am an employment lawyer at Taylor Wessing, and I am focusing very much in my practice on ESG. So I'm looking forward to a very interesting webinar today. And yeah, I think we will just start by also introducing my co-moderator, Clara.
Thank you, Katja. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you all today. My name is Clara Serva. I'm a partner at Tosini Freire Advogados, a law firm here in Brazil. I'm the head of the business and human rights practice in the law firm and also the coordinator of our pro bono practices. It's a pleasure to be with you all, and thank you for being with us today. So Katja, would you like to make the first introduction?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. We will just start quickly before introducing our panel by giving a quick definition on the S in ESG. So if you look it up in a dictionary and or find other definitions on the internet, you will encompass the following. So the S in ESG is generally understood as the management of the relationships with workforce, society, and the political environment. This means what we are looking at is the interests of the following groups: entities' own workforce, including the value chain, end users, so customers, as well as affected communities, so also directly affected or through the value chain. And this also means we are talking about the following objectives: decent working conditions, including for value chain workers, adequate living standards and well-being for end users, as well as inclusive and sustainable communities and societies. But of course, that's just the dictionary. We will take a much deeper dive today. And yeah, Clara, you wanted to add something?
Yes, sure. It's so interesting because this topic really encompasses a lot of things. And when we're discussing all of those stakeholders that you mentioned, Katja, we're talking about all of their rights as well. So we're talking about fundamental rights, constitutional rights, individual rights, collective and diffuse rights, and all of those rights related to all of those social dimensions that companies, enterprises in general, impact in a positive and negative way. So we're looking at so many different perspectives of the different publics that are impacted by the chain of production of different companies all over the world, with different cultures, different characteristics of each public. So we're talking about women, we're talking about LGBTI, we're talking about African descendants. Here in Brazil, for instance, is a public very distinguished. So we're talking about many dimensions, and for this reason, it's very interesting that we have such an important panel with very important panelists. And I would like to introduce Paulina, who is a very distinguished lawyer, a feminist lawyer and human rights activist. And Paulina, she holds a law degree from the Universidad Ibero-Americana and a master's degrees in international human rights law from the University of Essex in England. She has worked at the Supreme Court of Justice of the nation and at the Santa Marina and Steta. Paulina has experience in civil society advocacy and has participated in the drafting of national and international laws. So you can see, and I could go further in a very complete and very interesting curriculum, but I think that you will learn more from her by listening to her and not by her CV. So should I go on in the first question, or would you like to introduce the other panelists, Katja?
Yeah, I think we would just complete the panelists first. Yeah, hello, Paulina. And we also have two women from the World Bank here on our panel. Please welcome Victoria Kaitina and Liang Sheng from the project Women, Business and the Law of the World Bank. So Women, Business and the Law conducts studies and compares laws and regulations that affect women's economic opportunities in 119 economies. The background of the project is that by revealing how discriminatory laws can prevent women from fully and equally contributing to their economies, Women, Business and the Law makes the case for reform towards gender equality and highlights the way towards a more equitable and prosperous world. Victoria has joined Women, Business in the Law in January 2017, and she focuses on family law, labor law, violence against women, and currently conducts research around childcare policies. She has a law background, holds an LLB from Belarusian State University, an LLM from international business law, a certificate in public administration from the Swedish Institute of Public Administration and American University, Washington College of Law. She has prior worked in an international law firm in investment, finance, and trade matters before joining the Global Forum on Law in the Justice Department team at the World Bank, and is now part of the team in Women, Business and the Law, as well as Liang Sheng. Liang Sheng has joined Women, Business and the Law in 2020. And her research interests include family policy, equal pay, workplace and discrimination, and financial inclusion. Before joining the World Bank, Liang conducted analysis on tax policies and economic trends in the New York State government. Liang Sheng brings a Master in Science in Economics from Bocconi University and a Master in Public Administration from the State University of New York at Albany. So yeah, you see, we have a very interesting panel today, and let's jump right in.
Exactly, it's such an honor to be moderating this stellar panel. And Paulina, you're currently a member of Transforma, a feminist consulting firm that develops actions and efforts to promote substantive equality and effectively prevent and address workplace violence with a gender perspective in Latin America. And in your work, I know that Transforma is seeking to generate organizational and business change through a transformative approach to human rights and an intersectional gender perspective. So I was wondering, Paulina, could you tell us a little bit more on what does the S in ESG mean to you and how it influences your work with companies?
Of course, Clara. First of all, I want to such great panelists with people that I've been following the work for so long. And thank you so much for this. And Clara, I think this is an amazing question to start with, because I think there's a lot of confusion around what the S really means, no, in ESG. And I think this also depends a lot of on the context. I see there's people from all over the world that are joining on this webinar. And I would like to start by mentioning what the S does not mean. And the S does not mean philanthropy, does not mean pro bono work, but what the S really means and what we stand for in Transforma is putting people at the center of business and identifying the possible impacts that business operations might have on them, and how do we do this? How do we put people at the center and communities at the center by true participation of these people, no? So I think this is how we see it, what the S really means on this, no? And by commitment and responsibility. And thank you so much, Clara, for this question.
Yeah, thank you, Paulina, and thank you for this first insight. Just to show you how far or not far we've come, we want to introduce a quick poll question. What does the audience think? What do you think? In how many economies do women hold the same legal rights as men? So, and while we are waiting for the results, Liang, could you tell us more about the case of gender equality, since your project is focusing on this particular aspect of the S in ESG?
Yeah, hi, and thank you for having me on the panel. It's really a great pleasure to be here today. And as most of you gonna answer this question later on, I'm super excited to see how your answer gonna be later on. I saw that. Okay, 36% people say is 12 and 36 people say it's, okay, so 36% say it's 28. Okay, really sorry to say that it's only 36% of people answer this question correctly, so it's 12. Is the correct answer here. But so that's why we're here. Aside from the human rights aspect, research shows that legal gender equality is associated with greater economic empowerment for women, and achieving legal gender equality requires efforts by basically everyone, governments, private sector, and civil society, and international organizations just like us. And now I'm going to share with you the slides and show you the answer of the question before. And let me know if you can see it.
Yes, you can.
Okay, perfect. So in the last poll, this is actually our data, the data from our project, and you can see throughout the years, many countries joined this 100 score in our data set. And in 2022, Greece and Spain joined the 100, so there are 12 in total. So it might, I'm sure you are a bit shocked to see that 178 economies haven't still haven't achieved legal gender equality. That's because we have 190 economies in our research pool. And so let me introduce you a little bit of our project. Our research, WBL, is Women Business and Law Index, was created to, as the moderators just mentioned earlier, is to track the discriminatory laws that affect the path to gender equality. And it is supported by international legal frameworks and is structured around 8 different milestones of a woman's life, and we call them indicators. And the index is composed of 35 questions chosen based on evidence from economic literature, as well as statistics, significant associations with outcomes to women's economic empowerment. And the 8 indicators are divided into 3 main areas, and you can see on the screen. They are family law, labor law, and laws on violence against women. And in labor laws, we study laws on marital rights and duties, and their effects on women's mobility and intra-household bargaining power, marital property regimes and gender differences in property ownership and administration, divorce law, and gender differences in inheritance law. And the second part might be more interesting to everyone joining today. So labor law are laws addressing barriers to women's labor force participation, including job restrictions, discrimination in access to employment, inadequate paid leave policies to support working parents, as well as the lack of measures to address the gender pay gap and secure equal earning at old age. And there's a last one, which is also very relevant for today's topic, is laws on violence against women. We study laws addressing domestic violence and sexual harassment and establishing criminal penalties and protection orders for such cases. And study this slide is very exciting because these are 2 new research results from the World Bank. And the studies show that greater legal gender equality is associated with larger supply of female labor, a smaller gender wage gap, higher levels of female entrepreneurship, and a greater number of women in managerial positions. And on the left is this project reviews that the greater the equality between men and women in the law, the higher the share of female entrepreneurs. That's super exciting. And also on the right side, you can see the recent research analyzing women business and law data in conjunction with data from the World Bank's enterprise service data. It shows a more discriminatory legal environment is associated with a greater probability that businesses led by women will commence operations in the informal sector. And in economies where the aggregate women business and law index score is higher, which means less legal gender equality, businesses with women owners are less likely to have begun operating in the informal sector. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen.
Wow, that was very interesting. Also to see the correlation, like from the data. Thank you so much for sharing, Diang. Having seen this, Paulina, maybe you could also iterate a bit more on what initiatives to strengthen the S in ESG are considered to be important to this day.
Thank you, Katja. I think this is a question that is really connected by what we have seen by our colleagues, right? So I think some of the advances and the strengths is that this is part of the conversation. Just being here is an advance, seeking to have a clearer definition of what this really means, no? And the work that has been done by international organizations, the World Bank, UN Women, different agencies around the world that are showing the necessity of defining on what this really means and how we need to focus on group of people that have been historically been excluded and discriminated against. So I think just being here is an advance, but I also want to cover other advances regarding legislation. We have seen legal advances around the globe with a human rights based approach that seeks to define, to have a clearer picture on what this really means, no? And we have the EU directive that I'm certain that a lot of the people that are joining us today know about this. The legislation on due diligence in France. We have inter-American standards that have been published a couple of years ago, and we have discussions around the UN binding treaties on human rights due diligence. No, so I think this is being part of the conversation, and we've been seeing how this has been advanced globally and locally in certain countries around the globe. And this is the advance, right? To have this conversation and have to and seeing all these legal advances and discussions that are taking place right now. And also, I think to focus more on businesses and practical insights, it is very important to also acknowledge that the advances that we've seen, and is that businesses and investors are using their leverage to advance on the S, to comply on human rights due diligence process, and having redress mechanisms taking into place, and having this through their value chain or their supply chain, which sometimes can be more effective than having regulation, right? So I think just to pinpoint some of the advances out there, this is some that we're seeing: diversity, equity, and inclusion policies and practices in businesses that are being part of the conversation. So I'm very happy to see this. This is the second panel I've been on the S on ESG this week. So I think just being in this panel is part of the advance that we are living and seeing that we are being part of. Thank you, Katia.
And that's so interesting, Paulina, because we've seen different strategies by different countries in business and human rights. So some of them with national action plans, and some with regulations. And one very important dimension of the S is the gender perspective, isn't it? And for this reason, I would like to pose another poll question for the audience to reflect. And it is supposed to appear to you in just a few instants. In how many economies do you think women are not protected from sexual harassment in the workplace? And if you can answer the question, is in your screen right now. And while you all reflect on that matter, I would like to pass another question to Liang. And Liang, if you could tell us a little bit more about the main findings of your report on gender equality. That the data you presented before was very interesting, and I'm willing to hear a little bit more from you.
Of course. So in the last year's report, we find that global average women business and law index score is 76.5 out of 100. That's hard to understand, but it means that women have just 3/4 of the legal rights afforded to men on average. And it also means that nearly 2.4 billion women of working age globally still are not afforded equal economic opportunities. And I'm excited to see how you have in your choices. But one example that another finding that I'm gonna give you is that in 95 countries that we measure, so we measure 190. So that's half of what we measured. Women are not guaranteed equal pay for equal work. Oh, and I get the result. Oh, congratulations. But sadly, 76% of our participants answered it correctly. So 46 countries do not have any laws protecting women against sexual harassment in the workplace. That is a very sad result in our this year's finding.
Yeah, that's really shocking. I mean, 75%. Yeah, taking it from there, from the global perspective to the law firms here in the audience. Having seen that, just reflect on your own law firm. Does your firm integrate the S in ESG? And I think we have another poll on that. And I'm really excited to hear how our participants here are doing. And while we're waiting for the results to see how law firms here are doing, I must admit it's also challenging with the S in ESG. And a lot of my clients come to me and feel really challenged, and it's not so easy to really integrate the S in ESG. Paulina, you have a lot of experience working with companies who want to integrate the S and find those challenges and struggle. Could you tell us more about the challenges that we do see on advancing on the S in ESG to this day?
Thank you so much. I would like to link this question with the findings on laws that protect women against sexual harassment. And I would like to introduce this answer with some findings that we recently have on a inquiry from a government institution that measures violence against women here in Mexico. So what we have in Mexico, we do have laws that protect women against sexual harassment, right? So on this inquiry, what we have as a result is that more than 30% of women have experienced sexual harassment in the workplace. And what is really interesting is the finding that more than 70% do not have knowledge on grievance mechanisms that they can have to address this sexual harassment in the workplace. So we have a law that obliges employers to implement protocols or grievance mechanisms within their operations, so women have the chance to raise their voices and have this redress on sexual harassment. And the reality is that more than 70% of women do not have knowledge on these mechanisms that they should, right? So we have a law that protects them, but in reality, what happens is that this law is not effective. This law does not protect women, in fact. So I think here we can go into what do businesses need to really comply with the S in ESG. And I want to point it down to the sexual harassment case because we have evidence that the law does not protect if cultural change is not taken into account, if real commitment is not taken into account. So I would like to start with real commitment from employers to make this a reality. And we have a lot of compliance programs. We have this tone at the top that goes beyond legal compliance, but as a real commitment from leadership. So what I always say is that we need to take this real commitment from businesses, from workplaces, and integrate a gender perspective and a human rights perspective, and make this commitment tangible, and that it embraces the situation to make cultural change. And also I think that we need to take into account participation. And when we talk about participation, I say, let's talk about participation with a capital P. What this means, participation with a capital P. And we're talking about substantive and real participation with those that have been affected or can be potentially affected from a gender and intersectional perspective. Participation as a goal and not only as a mean, right? So we talk about having capacity building. We need to diagnose what is going on in the workplace, what is going on within our business, what is the real situation there. And in order to identify possible aspects and to have a real diagnose on the situation, we need people to know their rights and to know what sexual harassment really means, and go from the base from these chauvinist comments that can be taken as jokes, and acknowledge that this is also part of the violence that we see on the workplace. And well, I think once we have this, we need ongoing human rights due diligence mechanisms that include value chains. Companies and law firms and everyone here has a big opportunity to impact on cultural change beyond what we have on paper, on legislative initiatives. So I think that taking this into account can have a broader impact positively in our countries, in our society. Business are part of societal tissue, and they are the place that we are 8 hours working every day, and that we are professionally developing. So I think taking this into account is super important. And well, most not less importantly, but when there's an impact, businesses need to take and assume responsibility and redress and repair with a human rights perspective. So when we talk about sexual harassment, for instance, we're not only talking about sanctions, which is sometimes really confusing, that there's a sanction and we got over it. No, we need to have rehabilitation. We need to have non-repetition measures going on, and changing these policies that perpetrate gender-based violence in the workplace. So I think this is super important. And finally, taking into account each geographical context, each sector's context. We cannot have a formula for each business, for each law firm. We need to take into account what is the reality in our country, what is actually taking place. And that something that we always say in Transforma is sometimes we look to policies in the global north and we talk about leadership. But I think in some countries, such as Mexico, first we need to address violence in the workplace, sexual harassment. We cannot have strong leadership and gender equality when we are having gender-based violence and people cannot feel secure and safe in the workplace. So I think just to mention some points on what is really important, taking this into account and go beyond legal compliance. Sometimes we see that in law firms, we see this compliance as a checklist, no? Do you have a protocol to address and to prevent gender-based violence? Oh yeah, we have this, and we printed out some copies and we put them in a drawer and nobody knows about this. But it's giving the key is to give life to these initiatives that we are working on to make them a reality, because social change is right here in this action.
And that's very interesting, Paulina, because one thing you mentioned is on the integral reparation and the need for companies to really understand their businesses and their impact, and then build solutions thinking and based on that. And companies very often want copy-paste solutions, and that's not possible if you really want to look into human rights. And one data that you provided us is on the 30% of women that have lived sexual harassment. And in this percentage, I'm sure that it just encompasses those that are comfortable to saying that they've been sexually harassed. And this context is very makes it very clear that one of the issues that is necessary is to empower women, is their insertion in companies, in the economic perspective. So I would like to pass to Victoria, one of our special panelists today. And Victoria, I was really willing to listening to you on why is women economic empowerment in the world of the work so important, and what are the main challenges that you've been seeing?
Thank you, Clara, and hello, everyone. It's a pleasure for me to be here, and I'm joined today by a fantastic group of panelists and moderators, and I think it's great to have this discussion on the S in ESG, and also how closing long-standing gender gaps and adopting data-driven policy measures are critical to women's economic empowerment. I also have a few very nice slides, so let me just share my screen. Please let me know if you can see it. Okay, I think it works. Wonderful. So women continue to face major challenges that threaten to widen gender gap and entrench existing inequalities. They earn less than men, and they face a greater risk of violence in their homes. And progress has been made to address these challenges. However, we're going through very difficult times. War and displacement, climate change, coupled with the pandemic's ongoing nature. The global community is at risk of reversing the progress that has been made to bring women into the workforce. And addressing these challenges to achieving legal gender equality requires a concerted effort by government, civil society organizations, private sector, and international organizations, among others. Reforms to remove discriminatory laws are critical for women's economic empowerment. Legal and regulatory reforms can serve as an important catalyst to improve the lives of women, as well as their families and communities. And yet new laws, as Paulina mentioned, is not a silver bullet for women's inclusion. Legal reforms will improve the situation of women only if these laws are properly implemented, and if the wider ecosphere of private and public actors is supportive of them. So what's the role of the private sector in achieving gender inclusion in employment? Private sector plays an important role to effectively implement laws and policies to foster gender equality. And we may have a law on non-discrimination, equal pay, maternity leave benefits, but what is the purpose of such laws and policies if the private sector is not taking these provisions from paper and turning them into practice? So what the current state of legal gender equality? It is shocking that in 2022, there are still so many discriminatory laws that hold women back from working and starting a business. And on this slide, this is a variation in WLG index score across and within regions. And as you can see, there is still a lot of work left to be done to advance the gender equality agenda. Economies in OECD and high-income region, Europe and Central Asia, and Latin America and the Caribbean score above the global average, and the two regions that are farthest behind are Middle East and North Africa and South Asia. And while progress has been made, as I mentioned, the pace of reform must be accelerated. Every region has examples of economies whose governments are implementing good practice laws, and those that still have room to improve. And countries can look to their neighbors for examples which seeking to implement reforms or inspire others to do so. And here, just like want to bring to your attention that we have a great data visualization tool on our website that allows you to make this regional comparison and even country-specific analysis and comparison. So let me just stop here, stop sharing.
Thank you, Victoria. Very nice slides indeed. And legal reforms and their proper implementation in line with civil society and the private sector is really a necessary, an essential measure for us women to really achieve equality. And laws, is very shocking, the data that you provided us on how many laws still hold us women back. So I would like to have another poll question. So if you could put it in the screen for us to reflect on the implementing of the S in ESG. And I would like to ask Paulina another question. And Paulina, what do businesses need to consider to really comply with the S in ESG?
Thank you, Clara. I think what they need to take into account is, yes, this is a matter of a compliance, a matter of reputation, but we need to go beyond legal compliance per se, and seeing this as a marketing strategy as well, because something that worries me a lot is that sometimes we go into this pink and rainbow washing, that we're not taking into account the factors and the elements that we really need to take. For instance, participation, bringing leadership into this strategy. Sometimes that we see that this is a non-articulate initiatives that are taking place. We have a diversity, equity, inclusion committee, but this committee does not work with compliance officers, or the rest of the company does not know about this initiative. So I think this is really important to take into account that this is something that regards everyone in business, everyone that is having this approach and that is being touched upon the impacts of businesses. And also I would like to focus on why this is important for businesses, no? Because sometimes we don't see this on the long run. What is the bigger picture on this? What do businesses what do they gain with taking the S in ESG with a serious approach, no? And I think this legal compliance on the S, but also a real commitment takes into preventing fees and operational issues, as well as reputational impacts. So something that we're seeing is that consumers are taking the S very seriously nowadays. Business is changing. So now when we take into account the S from a real commitment, the reputational impact that we might have is let's say it's less the impact that we're having, and this, not most importantly, society is changing, and the expectation on how businesses and law firms and workplaces in general are doing their business is also taking into account, and this, no, I want to repeat, businesses are part of our social fabric and have a fundamental role for change to be a reality in our society, in our countries, regionally, globally. So I think this is very important for businesses to take into account.
Yeah, and actually our poll is also supporting what you said earlier, Paulina. We had 50% saying, no, I don't know about the policies in place and the participation of stakeholders in their own law firm. That really shows it's not only about having policy or having law in place, it's about living it and having society change, having the mindset changed inside companies and society as a whole. Yeah, now that we've heard so much also about the project Women, Business and the Law, I wanted to ask Victoria and Liang, what is next for Women, Business and the Law? What is planned?
Okay, Victoria, I'll start. And so we'll reflect to what we see in the implementation later. But before that, I just want to show you a little bit of what we are doing now. And also have a bit of several slides to show you here. Here we are. So I'm hoping you can see it. See people nodding. Okay. For example, from 2016, our team has organized in-country workshops with civil society organizations in 17 sub-Saharan African economies. And during the launch of our 2020 report, is held in Gabon and organized under the patronage of the First Ladies of Gabon, Burkina Faso, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And the team discussed barriers to women's work. So later, it spurred a lot of policy reforms in Gabon. And actually, the country became this report year's top reformer. And Gabon enacted significant changes to its civil code, for example, equalizing women's property rights and introduced domestic violence legislation for the first time. So this is just an example of what we are doing now. And to address what we've been discussing, and just as Paulina, Victoria, and everyone else in the panel and the moderators say, the law in the books doesn't really mean the law in reality. Is either on sexual harassment or many other topics that can affect women's economic opportunities. And this year, our team introduced a new conceptual framework for measuring the implementation gap. And the pilot exercise was conducted in 25 economies. It is still very small, but we examine both the supportive frameworks that create an enabling environment for working women and also expert opinions of progress made toward gender equality of individuals on the ground. That's kind of exciting, but what we found in these 25 economies actually revealed what we just saw. It says half of the supportive framework for adequate implementation actually exists, but in reality, it's not the case. It indicates a gap between the passage of laws and the implementation. And what we currently do now, and our goal is to continue exploring and improving this area so we can have more robust results in the coming years. I think Victoria have something to say on childcare. That's also
Thank you, Liang. I will be glad to add that beyond providing a working environment that is safe and inclusive for women, it is important to highlight the importance of women being equal at home and at work, and taking care of children should not be treated as a woman's issue, as it is essential for building inclusive societies. 114 countries around the world mandate paid leave for fathers, but the average duration of this leave is only 1 week. We also found that 50 countries offer paid parental leave for working parents, but are fathers really making use of these policies? What are the incentives for fathers to actually take up leave and share the burden at home? Or is the care burden again falling on women? And to expand a little bit on that topic, we decided to explore the area of childcare in our latest edition of the report, and our pilot data on childcare in 95 countries measures legal frameworks with regard to 3 pillars: availability, affordability, and quality of childcare services. Under the availability pillar, we analyze how laws can expand access to childcare services. Under the affordability pillar, we evaluate how everyone can benefit from these services, including low-income families. And under the quality pillar, we analyze if the legal framework ensures a safe and beneficial learning environment for children. And the reason why we decided to look into this is that policies targeting access to affordable and quality childcare services can have a far-reaching positive impact, not only for women, so they can join and stay in the labor market, but also for child development. So together, this boosts economic growth, creating a more diverse workforce and offering substantial business and employment opportunities. And clearly, this area needs to become a priority going forward to achieve better outcomes for women, children, and economy.
That's very interesting, Victoria. And how was the data collected for women, business, and the law? How was this data collected?
Absolutely, it would be my pleasure to share, and I have a few slides here. So, of course, indeed critical for women's empowerment, but if the pace of change stays the same, we will need at least another 50 years to achieve legal gender parity globally. And I would like to take a moment and to explain the Women, Business and Law report production cycle. To construct and release our index each year, Women, Business and the Law project undergoes a cyclical approach. We start by consulting with gender experts and we design our survey. We then send out our survey on family law, labor law, and violence against women to the network of our legal experts in 190 countries. And after we receive the surveys back, the team analyzes the relevant laws and regulations and begins updating the data with any recent reforms. And we then analyze the data, building evidence of the critical relationship between legal gender equality and women's economic outcomes, such as labor force participation. And the updated data set is released, and then the report is published, and then disseminated through a series of events all around the world. And the project and its impact would not be possible without the pro bono legal expertise of more than 10,000 experts across all 190 countries we cover. And for WBL 2021 report, we had over 2,300 experts that contributed with their knowledge, and you can find the ones that agreed to have their names published under the local expert section on the website. I understand that we're running out of time, so I would just like to invite everyone to join our network of contributors. And by participating, you will join the network of more than 10,000 experts around the world and receive individual acknowledgement on our website, a copy of the report, and a certificate of appreciation from the World Bank. We partner with global law firms to collect data. Yes, last year, contributors who had contributed to multiple data collection cycles kindly shared their thoughts, why they contribute and why the WBL mission is important for them. So let me just stop here, and if you would like to join our network, please sign up on our website.
That was perfect, Victoria. So I would like to just pass to Hannah and thank everyone for this amazing panel and such a very interesting explanation from you, Victoria, Liang, and Paulina. So Hannah.
Thank you. And as I mentioned, if you have a question, please feel free to email the question to me. I know we've sort of run out of time today, but we will take your questions and respond to them via email. Thank you again to Katya and Clara for moderating this panel, and to Paulina, Victoria, and Liang for participating as panelists. You'll find the recording on the website probably sometime next week. And then, of course, the third in this series will be taking place in December. So thank you, everyone.